think I'm ready. Just can you just do me a sound check?
Yeah. What do you want? Do you want me to sing?
1, 2, 3.
Perfect. Okay.
Should I look? No.
I would speak to him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Three,
Francis-
two, one.
Francisca. How would you pronounce your name?
Francesca.
Francisca.
Francesca.
Francisca.
Francisca. Oh, I'm sorry. Just hang on one second.
Yes, Francesca.
Okay. Ready.
Hello, Ms. Francisca. We welcome you to the CYG Newsroom Project, CTBTO Youth TV. We are very pleased to have you in the second Science Diplomacy event of the CTBTO. So we are going to ask about the current development of the US administration withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal. So how you think that it will impact the regional security of the Middle East? Because the Israel and Iran are recently they got confrontation, and then the US moved their embassy to the Jerusalem. So how it will hold the volatile the situation, and what do you think?
First of all, thanks for having me, and thanks to the CTBTO for inviting me. It's been a very interesting and very informative experience so far, and it's great to interact with so many young scholars at this conference. You know, the decision to withdraw from the JCPOA was actually not a shock for many American citizens or people who simply have followed what Donald Trump has promised during the presidential campaign. This was one of his promises, and something that he has maintained and kept. So in a way, we knew this was coming. But it happens in a broader context in which the US is rethinking pretty radically its foreign policy approach to the regional security in the Middle East, the Gulf region, but also more broadly, I would say, even beyond the region. It's clear under President Trump that there is now a realignment of interest that converges around Israel, Saudi Arabia in particular, and tries pretty dramatically to contain Iran. President Trump sees Iran as the major threat to the region, as a major destabilizing force, and therefore has always considered the JCPOA to be incredibly skewed in favor of Iran, and he has always said that the Americans basically got the short end of the stick. So in a way, he has been very coherent with what he had promised, and this is part actually of a containment strategy over Iran. In the short term, remember, the sanctions will not kick in before 6 months. In the short term, I don't think the decision will change very much. The Iranians will probably stay in the treaty. They will probably, in the agreement, they will probably try to ensure from the European side, the Russian side, and the Chinese side that the agreement brings economic benefits. But in long term, I think this will be an act that will deteriorate pretty dramatically the relation with Iran and with also other enemies or adversaries of the United States. I think this will impact the relation with China, for example, with Russia. There are a lot of rumors around the international community that the United States, even though they negotiate a treaty, ultimately they are unable or unwilling to fulfill their commitment, and therefore the word the Americans are giving is fundamentally, deprived of any political value. So it'll be very difficult to convince other countries to sit down at the table and to basically negotiate with the United States. I think the decision will also have major impact in the relation with allies of the United States, in particular the European Union, because now it forces the European countries either to step in and defend their companies so that they can actually still trade and deal with Iran, or it forces the allies simply to go along with the decision of President Trump, thereby betraying the independence and neutrality of the European Union and their major role in breaking the JCPOA. So I think in the short term, you won't have major changes, but I think in the medium and long term, there will be very, very difficult consequences. Let me also point out that these consequences have not been pondered by the US administration. There is no plan B beyond just withdrawal from the JCPOA. The Secretary of State, Pompeo, has argued that the United States is now willing and ready to renegotiate. But how can you renegotiate when you have just withdrawn from a treaty that you have previously committed on? So I don't think there is any additional strategy at this point.
So basically, this science diplomacy conference is held to like to teach young people like to build the confidence building. So how you think that the CTBTO can play a role again to bring those parties at the table?
I think one of the things that we used to do during the Cold War that has actually disappeared is to have more technical cooperation among scientists. This is something that really worked very well during the Cold War. You know, if you are able to bring countries to discuss technical issues, it can be nuclear safety, it can be nuclear testing, it can be nuclear security. Every party has interest in participating into these discussions. In fact, you can even think about a nuclear technical workshop between the Iranians and the Saudis, because both countries have interest in nuclear energy and they want somehow to improve, the effectiveness and the reliability of their nuclear energy program. So what I think the CTBTO can do is try to foster more technical discussions, try to forge a new generation, a global generation of scientists that can understand issues not only from the political side, but also from the technical side. And so you try to build confidence building mechanism and communication at the technical level, and then gradually you build on this confidence to tackle the most difficult political issues. So in my view, the fact that, for example, we have discussions about monitoring stations, this also means that many countries that host monitoring stations will have to train scientists to read the data. This is a very good development because it means we will bring in a new generation that has both technical capabilities and policy awareness. I think that is something that we can do at this given moment. Now, of course, we also have to be realistic. There are a lot of geopolitical constraints. This nuclear age is characterized by high risks. We see a modernization process in many of the nuclear weapon states. Countries like Pakistan and India now are expanding their nuclear weapon program. The Russians are also injecting new technology into the nuclear weapon program. So the opportunities for cooperation are limited. But we can use the CTBTO and the technical cooperation in order to advance some more trust.
So you are from the US Academy of Science, and they are already doing like a lot of the capacity building program in the other the territory in the BWC or biosafety and biosecurity. So do your academy has in future any program about this nuclear training or nuclear cooperation between the Middle East and especially between Pakistan and India, and involving all those regional countries?
Yes, we have. So the American Academy of Arts and Sciences has this new project we just launched called Meeting the Challenges of the New Nuclear Age. And really the point is trying to understand the nuclear risks that originate in this current nuclear age. There is a misconception that we are now living in a new Cold War. But my sense is that the Cold War comparison does not stand. This is an age that is actually characterized by many more nuclear risks that we used to have during the Cold War. You have technology risks. You have an arm race that is not only happening at the nuclear level, but is happening on the conventional level and the non-nuclear weapon level. For example, you have hypersonic, you have cyber, drones, you have artificial intelligence. So you have new technologies that are coming in that really destabilize the nuclear relations among countries. So that's one part of the problem. You also have a complete absence of strategic dialogue among nuclear weapon states and a huge divide with the rest of the international community. And then you have a new generation of people who have never lived through nuclear risks. So, the memories of Hiroshima fundamentally do not necessarily bring out historical memory for this young generation. So we need to train the generation to think about the nuclear risks of living in the current age. So the Academy has established a working group, and for the first time, we've basically decided that 50% of the working group will be younger nuclear scholars. They will bring their perspective to the table, but also not only an academic perspective, but also a practitioner perspective, and try to bring in their views about how we can formulate new nuclear negotiations, informal negotiations, dialogue that somehow try and form new policies moving forward. We are also trying to do something new at the university level. You know, my sense teaching at Fletcher is that we continue to teach nuclear issues like we used to do during the Cold War. Bipolarity, deterrence, strategic stability, arms control, we use the same vocabulary. But the Cold War is over. So we need to rethink the way in which we teach nuclear problems. What does it mean living in a world with 9 nuclear weapon states? What does it mean living with artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons? And it's particularly important to understand from the students' viewpoint what are the relevant topics that they make nuclear weapons so compelling today. So rethinking how academia really approaches the problem, I think, is fundamental.
And then you mentioned about the role of the youth, like the CTBTO started this youth initiative, like how is your perspective about that, and how it's changing the whole atmosphere to bring the treaty into force? And the second, like, is there like any possibility that the CYGA can cooperate and start some program with your Academy of Sciences in future for the training of the youth?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is the CTBTO Youth Initiative is extremely important because it helps us mobilize young people who wouldn't necessarily be interested in nuclear weapons. You know, one of the things that the CTBTO has done very well, in my view, is the fact that they were actually able to make a link between nuclear weapons and climate change and natural disasters. You know, Dr. Zerbo speaks often about the fact that we can use the monitoring stations not only for nuclear testing, but we use them for disaster preparedness or, you know, issues that pertain to basically human security. This is extremely important because it allows us to reach out to a young generation that is far more interested in climate change debate, in environmental issues, disaster preparedness, and it allows us to make the case that nuclear weapons, environmental protection, disaster preparedness all belong to an agenda for global development. Nuclear weapons cannot be separated from other discussions of broader social justice issues, international security, global peace. So the CTBTO, in my view, has stepped into a very important discussion that doesn't happen anywhere else. The nuclear discussion, unfortunately, remains very insulating. So the nuclear community normally takes, talks only among themselves, but they don't reach out to another community that might be interested in other issues still relevant for nuclear safety. And of course, the Academy always welcomes any collaboration with institutions that actually reach out to younger people. In fact, let me tell you that 2 years ago, we hosted Dr. Zerbo at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We were celebrating the 25th anniversary of the CTBTO. He came and we did a forum with experts, followed by a lunch and a work play with high school students. This has been one of the most successful events we hosted at the Academy.
That's amazing. And I want to ask, you mentioned that this data of the CTBTO can be used for the preparedness and also for the climate change. But if we see on those regional, countries, either in Africa or in the Middle East, so those countries don't have any facility to train their people, to analysis that data or to understand that data and then interpret for their country need. So how the U.S. Academy of Sciences can help for that capacity building, so that those countries can produce more analysts who can do the